Erik I'm here with Stefanie Herweck. I'm just the opening act. Right? Please don't spit or throw anything at me. We're really waiting for Stefanie here. But I've been asked to give some like kind of, yeah, no, there we go. Oh, epilepsy, right? Okay, so we teach at UTPA, English department, philosophy department, and we're also here tabling on behalf of this Sierra Club. Okay? And I was specifically asked to do maybe a little bit of background on fracking. So I threw together a kind of presentation, and like I said, I'm going to go lightning fast if you can keep up with me. Here we go. Basic thing, top of this line. World population is growing exponentially. Exponentially. We're at 7-some billion people, we're going to be at 9 or 10 billion people. If everything goes as fine, we'll probably be at 11. I don't think it's going to go very fine, but okay. That's a different discussion. We can talk about that afterwards. Assuming everything goes fine, this is the energy that we need. So we're about right here. Industrial civilization has learned to basically harness fossil fuels. So we're about right here. And because there's so many of us, and there's so many of us trying to develop, we need this much more energy. Now I'm going to get to climate change in a second, but if you think in terms of climate change, this much has gotten us here. And in the next several decades, we're going to be extracting and using this much. You see the problem. But at any rate, for right now, let's not concern ourselves with that. Let's just go forward. Our civilization needs energy. We need to have energy thermodynamic inputs to make everything work. So one of the ways that we can make up energy demand is by fracking. Okay? Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about shale deposits around the United States. Gas, natural gas, sometimes oil, that we couldn't get to before because we didn't have the technology and we didn't have the drilling techniques available. So just to zero in here, as we get closer and look with a little bit more of a microscope on Texas, you all, have heard of the Eagle Ford Shale, right? Here is, right, the underground here. I think this is the oil deposits. This is the mixture of oil and natural gas. And to the south, it's natural gas. Okay? If we zoom in a little bit more and look at the infrastructure already being built, like the extraction infrastructure, you can see that the oil and natural gas, like the central part that's the sweet spot. That's where you can get, both of them going. But eventually this entire region will be developed as it becomes economically feasible. Gas prices go up and so on, we'll extract and produce. And it's not just our region in the United States. So the companies in the United States have been doing this all over the United States, but it's going to surround us. So these geological formations go into Mexico, into the Burgos Basin, and the Sabinas Basin, and that's what's happening. And that is what is going to continue to happen all around us. Okay? What's the problem with that? Well, first of all, just to sort of highlight this. Here we go. This is like a traditional formation, so we had to sort of look for traditional formations in the past, but now we can go right down and drill into the actual shale formation and fracture it. How does this go? Traditional drilling, vertical drilling, down, right above the shale formation, okay? Then there's going to be a casing, right, put in, and it's going to be cemented in to try to protect the aquifers. Yeah, okay. Right. You know I'm going with this. I'm preaching to the choir here, right? Okay? But this is the idea. And they tell us, no, we're improving on this, it's going to go well. You switch to vertical drilling. So you drill vertically across the shale, right? Then you drop in explosive charges every so often. It rips into the shale. You put pressurized fracking fluid into those fissures. It continues to fracture the rock layer. You plug it, and you repeat, and you repeat. You drill another horizontal well. You do it, you repeat, right? Until you have enough gas coming out of this thing to make it economically viable. Eventually, you drill out the plugs, and the gas comes rumbling up the well. Okay? So that's the idea. We're going to tap into cheap energy, and we have the technology to do it. One obvious thing, I don't know if you've been watching or seeing, right? In different geological formations, we're having earthquakes. Ohio, Arkansas, big ones in Oklahoma, and there are some in Texas as well. This is a particularly bad weekend, right? Fracture the shale, and maybe the bookshelves come down on your head or something. Okay? And you could say, well, okay, a little rumbling, little earthquakes, maybe that's the price that it pays to have an advanced industrial society. Right? But we do see these numbers increasing. Okay? So if you look around, what's happening with earthquakes? Well, there we go. One of the more pressing issues are the issues surrounding the water that it takes. The water that it takes. So each well requires 2 to 3 million gallons. I think the average in Texas is 2.8 million gallons of water. And that is coming out of, for example, Edinburgh. That is coming out of our freshwater systems. Okay, so that's driving up water prices for us and putting us in a stress situation. And in fact, if you look around the state, the extraction of water for these wells, a lot of the fracking is occurring in places that are already water stressed or in drought. So here's a map. The little black spots here tell us where the fracking is happening. 55% of this fracking, and again, each oil well or gas well will be, a couple million gallons in places that are experiencing drought, or in which the groundwater, the aquifers, is being overdrawn. So it's a nice confluence of different things here happening.
What do the colors mean in that?
What? Oh yeah, you can't really see. There are different levels of where the aquifers, for example, like the Ogala aquifer, is being overdrawn. So the irony is, you don't have water for your crops or for your livestock, but we seem to have water for fracking that area. You know what I mean? And we're overdrawing those aquifers. Those aquifers can't replenish themselves fast enough. Okay? Now here's what you're talking about, or what you were laughing at. They tell us that these wells are safe. But the issue is, if the casing or the cement begins to crack, right, you have either the fracking fluid or the natural gas getting into our water tables, into our aquifers, that many communities depend upon. Okay? And this isn't a maybe. This isn't a maybe. This is pretty much a certainty. So geologists up at Cornell basically said, when you install one of these wells, given the current technology, 5% of them fail at installation in their casing. Now the failure might not be at the aquifer, or we've definitely seen where it is at the aquifer. But as those casings, even after they're plugged, continue on, about 30 years down the road, you're looking at a 50% failure rate. So we haven't even begun to see the damage that's potentially possible from each well. That's scary. Okay? So like I said, you're going to have the gas come out of it, possibly get in there, but you're also going to have the fracking fluid itself and production water. If that shale is filled with any water along with the natural gas, that comes up the well too and needs to be dealt with. That's another issue. Okay? So, you may have a situation if your city or if your property relies upon groundwater. If you're near these wells, you're drinking that. Good luck with that. Okay? And this isn't, again, this is something that we've seen. It's happened. Here's, I believe he lived outside of Dallas, and you've seen the things, the faucets, and they explode and so on. So this is like where you get fracking fluid backing up into your aquifer, and this is, and then your well, and this is where you get the natural gas. Yeah, go ahead.
What's fracking fluid made out of?
I'm glad that you asked that. Because, well, if we had more time, I would pop this open. There's about 600 different chemicals.
Okay.
If you go to an industry website, they're like, oh, it's like citric acid, it's fine. It's water and orange juice, you're okay. If you actually look at the list of the things that have been found, it's a different recipe for every different situation. And it is a small amount, given the large, you know what I mean? But here's the thing. When we extract that fracking fluid or that production fluid, the way to get rid of it, the number one way to get rid of it, is to evaporate it. So you see these big evaporation pools either next to the fracking site, or they'll truck it by tanker off. Then the idea is, well, we can't really put it in the water system or whatever, so we're just going to let it evaporate. Whoops. Until we get down to the nice nitty-gritty of whatever chemicals are left in that stuff. Right? Now everything's fine. Right?
No problem.
No problems. And to highlight, issues with, there are lots of issues with air pollution, but one of the interesting things is when, like, radon comes back up with that fluid, especially with the production fluid, and then it sits out. these places have, according to the EPA, the radiation levels are too high. And they basically map on the Marcellus Shale where the water is spitting out radiation. You know, and I mean, I used to live right there 10 years ago. You know, and like I said, this is coming soon to a neighborhood near you. Another sort of thing is if you go up to these production sites and you use a FLIR camera that can image the gases coming off it, you see fugitive emissions. So any kind of like natural gas infrastructure along the way leaks to some extent. They tell us, no, it's very efficient, but you have to put a camera on each one to see actually what's happening there. Now this is very scary, obviously, if you work there. One of my friends works out in Louisiana, and he just tipped over one day into the mud, almost suffocated. He had his buddy pull him up, because the gases coming off these wells can be very high. And they get into our neighborhoods and so on. Yeah.
So that's not a fire, that's an infrared image of
Yeah.
gases.
Yeah, you can go on eBay, buy one of these FLIR cameras for
The yellower it is,
$5,000,
the more corrupted it is.
and you can image it. Yeah. You know. So when we look around in Texas, for example, we see mounting complaints, and they're usually water complaints. They're usually, you know, it's the fracking fluid evaporating and getting in, or it's methane in some way is working their way from the fugitive emissions into your house. So you're like, I mean, you can read these like basic comments. But again, this is old news if you're in the Marcellus Shale, you know, up in Pennsylvania and so on. So this is kind of a nice new thing for Texas to try to deal with. And again, you can have this attitude, well, it's up north in the Eagle Ford Shale and in no man's country. I don't really deal with it that much here, but you know. Okay? Now, if you think, yeah, go ahead.
What about the Borges Basin?
Yeah, that's coming. That's coming. Yeah. So, I mean, we're surrounded, right? So, I mean, I hate to use a cheesy meme, but I found it on the internet, so I thought I'd use it. If you think anyone's coming to save you, that was ruled out from the get-go. Hydrofracturing technology in order to stimulate investment and build a capital plan for it, it's exempt from Clean Air, Clean Water, and the Safe Water Drinking Act. From the get-go. Okay? You can only bring a civil case, like one-to-one, against, you have to show a property damage. And this is a continuation here, right? So as the drilling industry and the fracking folks get more powerful, they have more money, and they can reinvest in political clout. And you see every single year, the donations and the money going into campaigns increasing. And again, if you follow any of these stories, especially in Texas, I mean, that cloud has been established by the oil industry a long time ago. But even in the EPA at the federal level, they're not looking out for us. And the message in a lot of ways is, yeah, we're good people, and I trust that they're good people, but the system is set up to de-incentivize the investigation of these issues and really doing anything about it. So it's a very frightening sort of thing. What you see playing out politically and economically and so on is really, I think, a defining thing of the 21st century, where it's urban interests against rural interests. Right? Most of our population in the United States now lives in cities. What do city people want? They want to buy stuff, they want good jobs, they want energy coming in. Where does it come from? I don't give a rip. As long as I can keep the lights on and keep my car running. Whereas if you live out in these environments, it's sparsely populated, the political power is not concentrated rurally, and, you know, Stefanie gave me a good term to use. These different parts of America are being set up as resource colonies for extraction. And that's basically what's next for us, is we're becoming a resource colony. Now, I'll get into that in a second, but just to let you know, I mean, this is sort of things that I worry about. Planetary scientist James Hansen, right, former head of the Goddard NASA Institute, right, says if your carbon concentration in the atmosphere is beyond 350 parts per million, eventually it's game over for your civilization. You destabilize the climate regime that has prevailed on this earth for the last 10,000 years and allowed us to evolve civilization. And what comes next, in the long run, we don't really know. Past a certain point, there's no coming back.
Where are we? Oh, we're turning
I'm one step ahead of you here. We're about to crack 400. We're about to crack 400. And now, if you think about that graph that I started with, look how many carbons how much carbon we're gonna put in the atmosphere to go. So right now, the excess energy going into our atmosphere is like an atomic bomb going off every second. Every second, boom, 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 is the energy that's mounting up in our atmosphere. That's the way Hansen describes it. So again, we've gotten there just by going this far. And we're going to go this far into the next century. At least that's the plan. I don't know that that's going to happen when you put that much energy into the atmosphere, but that is the sort of extraction plan to keep everything going. And even in the midterm, this is an extreme consequence to us, because in the American Southwest and Texas, we're extremely vulnerable to these early phase climate changes. So they're saying by the end of the next century that most of the American Southwest is going to be Dust Bowl conditions for decades at a time. If you're paying attention to how the climate models work and so on, here's what the geophysicists are saying. Las Vegas done, Phoenix done. And they're saying even, I'm from Fargo, North Dakota. They're saying Fargo, North Dakota by 2100, if we pull on this route, the climate of Phoenix, Arizona as it is now. Right? Last little bit here, and I'm going to turn it over to Stefanie, is this. So remember, she and I were talking about this idea of being a resource colony. Here's the best part, right? So we're extracting all of this stuff, and we're going to build liquefied natural gas. And one of them is in Brownsville, because we're right in the middle of the Burgos and the Eagle Ford Shale, this geological formation. So we're going to pipe it all down to Brownsville. And we're being told, jobs, rainbows and puppy dogs, and economic development and all this sort of thing. No, wait. All of that gas is going to come down, and to liquefy it, we have to burn half of that gas to liquefy the other half. In other words, it provides the energy to compress and to liquefy for shipping. Okay? So all the pollution from that gas, from burning that gas, half of it is going to be in Brownsville. Right outside the city. You can talk about habitat and so on, but basically dumping pollution into the city. Why? Because we want to ship it. So once you compress it, you ship it. And then where does it go? China. So in other words, think about us being a resource colony. We get all of the pollution, and China gets all of the benefit. So our natural resources that we could spread out over a longer time, do less harm to the environment, are basically, the plan is to ship them off to China and power the Chinese economy, which has now overtaken ours, by the way. Sort of last thing about this. So right now we're being told, hey, Edinburgh, they're building this power plant that's going to power us by natural gas, and it's going to be really cheap because natural gas is cheap. Once we start shipping it on the international market, the price of that natural gas to us will triple or quadruple. So, will it provide jobs? If you work directly for the industry, or if you invest in it, then it's great. But for the rest of us that are dealing with the environmental, the health problems, the economic problems, the turnaround in a decade or so, not so great if you actually do a cost-benefit analysis. Right? So again, you look at sort of these arguments against this stuff, and when you look at the consequences, and you look at what's happening and ask, is this good for us? And the answer is no.
But it's good for China.
It's really good for China.
It's good for China because before they
because they're having a pollution problem. So if we can keep more of the pollution over here in South Texas, then the air is going to clear up over there. It's going to be great. Yeah. So this is the future that I want to see. If we want a durable economy, and jobs going into the future, and a planet. This is a planet we can live on. We need to figure out how to get people have an economic boom. Now, we're not the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, I think. I think we're the Saudi Arabia of wind and of solar, if we can figure out how to grow that.
I have a question.
Okay. Well, do you want? We have another speaker here, so if you want to
real quick.
Okay.
Take just a couple of seconds.
See what I can do.
Going back to that single fracking well.
Okay.
30 years, you're saying that it could be producing? One well?
No, well, even that, if it's in a sweet spot, yeah. But we're looking at, you know, she turned me on to this article and I was reading it, and I read a couple other articles that say a lot of these wells that they say will go a couple decades into the future, they're not. This is not as lucrative as they're saying. So the boom-bust cycle, even for our economy, is going to be much shorter and more compressed than you think it's going to be. So it's not going to, you know, save us economically.
Then you have that rotting infrastructure.
Yeah, now you bought in and invested in the infrastructure that could crash out early and investments tank there. And it's a mess. On pretty much, when you look around the entire thing, this bill of goods that we're being sold is largely nonsense. Stefanie.
Can you get my So, I want to pass around a couple of things while I talk. One is that we are collecting signatures on a petition against LNG, which I'm going to talk about. So if you want to wait until after to kind of know what you're signing, that's fine as well. But I want to make sure everybody gets it. And then Erik talked about climate change here. And Erik and I and some other people have been sort of discussing climate change and the concerns for climate change. And we've had people approach us from all different walks of life in all different areas, working on all different issues like some of you may be. And they all kind of are expressing this urge to, you know, I'm doing all this other stuff. I can't necessarily join an environmental organization at this point. But I really want to know more about climate change. I really want to talk to people about what's going on. I'm really concerned about this. So we have come up with this idea to have kind of a casual event twice a month. It's called Green Drinks. And we're going to start out at least not this February, but next Wednesday, February 18th. At Gratington Glass in McAllen. So we're just going to have some drinks and talk, and eventually, after this first one, we're hoping to have like a 5-minute sort of presentation to engage people in a question, and maybe you would want to come, and maybe you would want to say, you know, here's an issue that I'm interested in concerning the environment, concerning climate change, and then you'd have sort of a sounding board to listen for new ideas and stuff. So I'm going to pass these around in case you
I can pass them around.
Yeah.
You want this?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. I have a meme also. This is Representative Cuellar, and he, along with many of our local politicians, as Erik noted, have said that the Rio Grande Valley is going to be the new Middle East because of natural gas. And I made this meme because this is Qatar. This is Qatar LNG. This is an LNG facility. Qatar this year became the second most polluted country in the world. 2 other countries, Bahrain and United Arab Emirates, are also in the top 10 most polluted countries. We don't want to be the new Middle East. And I'm going to skip through some of this. We didn't really exchange notes, so there's a little repetition. But as you can see, this Eagle Ford shale play actually does wrap around us. And so the idea is we're going to become a hub for natural gas here in the valley. And they want to do this by building natural gas, liquefied natural gas export terminals. There are, at this point, 4 active leases at the Port of Brownsville. These are leases with the Brownsville Navigation District. And these are the cubic feet per day that they expect to export out of the port. Those are the 4 companies that we're dealing with at this time. The Brownsville Navigation District would be happy to have many more. So, and I want to show you the lease locations. So this is Highway 48 that goes from Brownsville to Port Isabel up there. And that's the ship channel. This little thing is it says fishing harbor, but this is the shrimp basin. You might know if you're there. And so the leases are these yellow places. And a little bit about what LNG is, maybe a little bit more detail. So as Eric was saying, the shale gas is, or the fracked gas is going to come from Eagle Ford and potentially, eventually from Mexico is the idea. Through pipelines, these are high pressure, high capacity pipelines that are from 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and they will have to build a lot of new pipelines through potentially our area because of all the places that they're coming from the Eagle Ford. That pipeline quality gas has to be even further refined. So in the newspaper, some of the LNG, one of the LNG company CEOs said, "This is just a big refrigerator." But the reality is that it's more like a refinery because the pipeline quality gas, the methane that they have to use has to be almost 100% pure methane to be able to liquefy it. So they're actually going to remove some impurities, including some really highly toxic impurities like volatile organic compounds like benzene and toluene. And they remove the heavier hydrocarbons, or what's called the wet gas, or the liquid fuels like propane, hexane, and butane. And what they do is recycle those by moving those into the refrigeration process that is used to actually cool the gas, which has impacts because those gases are actually more explosive and more flammable than methane itself. So the kinds of accidents that have happened in gas facilities often don't involve the methane first, they involve these more volatile fuels. So the methane is cooled to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, and that shrinks it to 1/600th of its original volume. Then it can be loaded onto tankers, and the tankers export it to, as Eric said, to Asia, to Europe, where they can get higher prices for gas. Right now, shale gas, you can look up some of the companies' statements on this, and they'll tell you we're not really making a lot of money because gas prices are too cheap, and the process of fracking is too expensive. So they're really not getting enough profit there. It's not profitable unless they're able to sell it for higher prices. This is an inherently polluting process. And because these are just leases at this point, these are just proposals, we're still waiting for this to go through the regulatory process. They haven't released any projected estimates of their emissions or the pollution, but we can estimate the pollution. And what I have done is gone through and looked at the pollution estimates for this facility, which is Sabine Pass in Louisiana, the Texas-Louisiana border. This is an LNG facility that they're expanding, and they've released the emission expectations. So I just did the math, and I figured out how much what's the expected exports for all of these companies, and I figured out that we're going to be at we can expect greater than 5,200 tons a year for nitrogen oxides. This is the brown stuff. This is the brown cloud. And that's actually equivalent to all the vehicles in Cameron County and the amount of nitrogen oxides that they produce. So we're talking about a little space inside of the ship channel on the way to the island, and it's going to be producing as much nitrogen oxide as all the cars. So it's going to be brown. It's going to be brown out there. Greenhouse gases, greater than 7.2 million tons per year. As you know, greenhouse gas is what causes climate change, right? Just to give you a little way to figure this out, the largest sources in Cameron County, the Silas Ring Power Plant and the municipal dump, only produce 130,000 tons. So, I mean, this is really supersizing our carbon footprint. And we are on the front lines of climate change. We're a frontline climate change community. We're subject to drought. We're subject to intense storms. We're subject to sea level rise. we really cannot afford to do this, to produce this much carbon. VOCs, 258 tons a year. There is no safe level of VOCs. They won't tell you the safe level of these. And they are increasingly being linked to cancer clusters and to rare cancers that people are getting. Carbon monoxide, this is a 15% increase in Cameron County, especially harmful to pregnant mothers and to fetuses, to babies. 17 tons per year of sulfur dioxide. This is the stuff that causes acid rain. And we're talking about an area that's close to the coast, so it could have impact on marine life. It could have impact on the prevalence of red tides. And then particulates. Doing this research, I found out that the Brownsville-Harlingen area already has among the highest level of particulates in Texas. We don't want to be contributing to that. And it's also hazardous. LNG itself doesn't catch fire. It only catches fire when it evaporates and the gas to air concentrations reach 5 to 15%. And then it burns very hot, twice as hot as a house fire. And because of that, first responders can't approach it. So these fires are left to burn themselves out. They have to be. There's not really a conventional means to do it.
Is that fire spontaneous?
It isn't spontaneous. It has to hit it. It has to be at the appropriate concentrations, and it has to hit an ignition source. Yeah. So the scary thing is that it can produce a vapor, and methane, as you know, it doesn't have a smell. There's no way to know it's around. That can this vapor can travel and then ignite as well.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
You said it doesn't have smell to it, but don't they usually add something to the,
An odorant. I'm thinking there's not an odorant in liquefied natural gas. I should check that out. But I don't know why they would have an odorant, because it would be contained. You just make me go, oh, there's something I need to know.
Well, in theory it'd be contained, but the reason they have the odorant is to detect if it is not contained.
Right, but I'm just wondering if the requirement of the purity would keep them from having to, yeah. So accidents do happen. This is the largest LNG accident in history. This is Skik, Algeria. And again, this happened in the refrigeration process because of those those heavier hydrocarbons that are more flammable and explosive. Killed 30 people, injured 70 people. And then this one happened in Washington State. There was an explosion and it punctured that LNG tank right there. They had to evacuate everyone for 2 miles. The fire chief said that if that luckily it did not catch, it did not ignite. The fire chief said that if it had ignited, it would have killed everyone within 3/4 of a mile instantly. So, and then everyone within the 2 miles would have been subject to thermal radiation. And then, so those are things that happen, mechanical issues, but we actually have a whole other hazard to think about. Because of rising sea levels and stronger storms, Climate Central has estimated that there's a 1 in 6 chance that floodwaters will overtop 4 feet by 2020, which is
Not very far.
5 years away.
I do.
And so all of these places in the green that you see, the satellite, that's all under 4 feet. And as you can see, these are where the LNG facilities would be. So what happens when they're flooded out? What happens if there's a strong storm and it actually causes damage? And then tankers also bear a little bit of, or have some risk. There hasn't been a breach of a tanker. So it has been safe up to now, but the problem is that the tankers any kind of problem would be really catastrophic. So the Sandia National Laboratories actually created hazard zones around tankers in 2004. And the middle, the solid, is a high hazard zone. It's a third of a mile around the tanker. And you can see we kind of did a diagram to show you the tankers moving down the ship channel and what they would come into contact with. This is a risk of death kind of area. And then the zone 2, the medium hazard, is 1 mile. And there is a threat in that area of the vapor cloud. That's the reason for these large hazard zones, is because of the vapor cloud that can travel. They say that within that, there should be areas of refuge established in communities. Okay, so we're talking about needing, I don't think they're gonna do this, but needing an area of refuge when you're at Slitterbond, okay? and they also say community warning procedures. So if you've ever been to places where they have nuclear power plants, you see like warning sirens on the telephone poles and stuff like that. So that could really put a damper on Padre Island tourism.
Let me ask you a question. I've been on Highway 48 before, out to the airport. I'm wondering, that's the intercoastal canal though, isn't it? That leads around on the pipeline and so forth?
Which one?
No,
The intercoastal?
the intercoastal canal that leads all the way from the west.
This is the ship channel.
It's the ship channel.
Yeah.
Okay.
The intercoastal is up there.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I see.
There's also wildlife. So, sorry. This is also prime wildlife. These are leases on prime wildlife habitats that have until very recently been leased by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because they were so critical to ocelot conservation. So there's that. If you don't know about the wildlife corridor, we have a wildlife corridor that was established in 1979 and has been growing, and the idea is to buy up enough wild lands and to either revegetate them or keep them wild, to ensure that animals can move up and down the river, and eventually the hope is one day to be able to have have species migration across, the international boundary. This is our ocelot, a beautiful picture of our ocelot. And to sort of show you, these are the tracks of the Lower Rio Grande Valley National Wildlife Refuge. This is the area that was until recently leased to them. This is the Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge, the Bahia Grande unit. And they actually built an ocelot crossing under 48 because they had an ocelot that had a radio collar, and they figured out from that those ocelots are crossing the ship channel. It's not a barrier to them.
Wow.
But this would be ocelots. This is an LNG facility. Ocelots are extremely sensitive to light, and they won't go anywhere near it. So essentially, we would be busting up that corridor. It would no longer exist, and there may, depending on how many of those facilities are built, it may be impossible to create a connection between those. There's also some, am I doing time-wise?
I don't know.
I'm allowed to go over,
I
right?
don't know, I'm supposed to monitor. Where are we at?
So,
A little bit over, like 6 minutes over.
okay. So there's a lot of wetlands there. Wetlands are really important. Bahia Grande, which was that big area there, that was the largest wetlands conservation project in North America. And the original leases called for LNG here and LNG here. This is the Bahia. So really quickly, the jobs. We're talking about a few hundred LNG jobs, really, depending on how many of the facilities actually get built. The construction jobs will be minimal. The companies have bragged about the fact that they're going to have prefabricated plants that are built in South Korea, and then shipped over. And they also brag about not disrupting the labor force. That's yeah. Which says they're gonna create as few jobs as possible, right? And they're at least telling their shareholders that.
Isn't the reason why they don't supply jobs because they don't hire people anymore? That's all this and it's everything's automized.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's why we need jobs. But we have many thousands of jobs that depend on tourism, that depend on commercial shipping. We have the largest. Did you know this? We have the largest Port Isabel and Brownsville are the largest commercial shipping port in Texas. And my suggestion.
Larger than Houston?
Yes. And my suggestion is that that's because we don't have that heavy industry all around. We actually have fisheries that are healthy because we don't have things like LNG plants. And there's a lot of money in beach tourism and nature tourism as well. And these economic drivers are actually gonna enhance our quality of life instead of degrade it like LNG will. So I actually have a report. I brought a couple of copies, and you can, if you want to read the whole report, that's my blog, valleygrownspace.wordpress.com. We have a great community. It's mostly happening in Brownsville right now. We're hoping that this green trees might get some stuff happening up here in this part of the valley. But our Facebook page for the Save Our GB from LNG on Facebook, and then this is the website. Yes.
Stephanie, before we close, maybe one thing on the people's mind should be how can we take steps to control our energy?
Our personal
How can we as a
energy.
society, as Americans, how can we, take control of that